The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Whoa. Past Tylor. I do get to know what that means now. Yes, my friends, welcome back to a very special episode of Through the Glass Columns, in which I, Greg, your host who knows nothing, now know exactly one thing, which is what the name of the podcast means. It took us 98 episodes to get there, my friends, but Tylor, on your soundboard, hit the thunderous applause. Yay! Woo! Standing ovation. I'm there.
I just want to make it very clear that everyone who has read this book is rolling their eyes and going, wait till next week, Greg. You don't really know what it is.
Well, for those of you who are somehow just joining us, I am Greg. I know very little about these books, and maybe even less than I think I can brag about knowing. And I am here to welcome you back to our episode, which we are going to be tonight discussing chapter 23 and 24 of The Shadow Rising, book 4 in the Wheel of Time series. And joining me as always is, the Rand to my Matt. It's Tylor. Hi, Tylor.
I don't know if I like that comparison. No.
Just this one time, you're running off to Destiny and Prophecy, and I'm like, sure, why not? I'll come with. I got nowhere else to be.
Okay, yeah, that actually doesn't sound completely wrong. I'll give you that one. I am very excited that we have reached this point in the book. I think we have, for a long time, you have been asking me, when in the world do I get to know? And today, you half know, and I'm very proud of you for that. What was your reaction on first read? Like, I know both of us are people who, when someone says the name of a movie in the movie, we are like, we point and do the Leo DiCaprio thing. So I'm curious whether that was your reaction or whether you were surprised at what it was. Like, give me your thoughts on having learned what the name of the podcast is, and then we can actually, talk about these chapters or whatever.
So, and I understand when you're saying we half know, because there were kind of two different things that could be the glass columns, right? There was first some generic talk about, and if you're somebody who listens to this before you read the chapters, go read the chapters, because we're just going to dive right in. So there was, the first mention was essentially skyscrapers, right? Like, these are columns made of glass, and then they kind of build that more. I believe palaces tends to replace the columns part of that formulation as the chapter goes on. And then we had actual glass columns around the Tree of Life, as I understood it.
Yes, that is accurate.
Excellent. So there's also a Tree of Life. We're going to have some fun things to talk about. Holy biblical Batman. And so it was very exciting that this is, like, essentially, as I read this moment, a kind of wellspring of knowledge and information of becoming great. And it's kind of the closest to divinity we can get. Again, biblical. And it was only by passing through the glass columns that you can reach that higher level. So here we are. I have now reached that higher level. I have slain Tylor. I am now the master.
That is how podcasts work. It's entirely based on Highlander rules. There can be only one. Once you have read the book, I no longer can claim that title. I like it.
Perfect.
If that's your impression to the big news of the week, what was your impression to the chapters overall? Because what we are focusing on is honestly something that happens all in the last maybe 20-30% of what we read. So how did you feel about what came before it?
I like these chapters a lot. It felt like we were really like the, I don't drive stick, but you know what? There's that moment where, like, you're shifting the gear and there's just that kind of pause while the clutch is down, I think. And it's like, and then it clicks into the gear and it's the car just taking off at that new speed. And I feel like almost last week when we thought things were starting and they didn't quite. That was the quiet moment, and then this
Yeah.
felt like vroom vroom, here we go. And so I was very excited. I thought, I was surprised at the amount of exposition dump. I
Yeah.
guess really across both, but particularly the first chapter tonight, which I'm sure will lead to a nice nap I get to take in a few minutes while you spend 2 hours summarizing that chapter.
Oh my God, I don't even know how I am going to do it. It's gonna take a little while, y'all. I think that was maybe my big surprise is it's not very often in a fantasy book that I simultaneously feel like I am getting a exposition world building dump, and in the same time I'm like, yeah, the pace is finally picking up. Like that is the oddity that this book is pulling off in these chapters, but that's exactly how I feel. I think you're summarizing it exactly right. And so that's what's tricky here is I know that we have things to talk about, but all of them feel like details about the world and not things that actually happened to our characters.
Yes. I even though well, I think some momentous things happened to
Yeah.
Matt of them all, but it did feel like everybody else was in a kind of holding pattern moment, and is about to experience big things. I think Matt just got to his first, but it was very clear that Egwene, Moraine, Rand, they all have some major story to come, and
Yeah.
maybe Rand got a little more than those other two, but and I should include Avienda in there,
Yeah.
who was going full Forrest Gump through the second chapter, just like but naked because it's Robert Jordan,
Yeah.
and so such as it is. But yeah, it still felt really exciting to have that momentum. And I think I picked out some I did what I try to do in chapters like this, which is pick out a couple details that stood out to me, anticipating that in good place fashion, I found two of the interesting things, of which there were 127 clues or something such.
That is accurate of this chapter. It will be impossible for me to show you all of the breadcrumbs. And if we're talking about this feeling like all of the characters are on the precipice of something really exciting, I think we need to pause on the precipice of something really exciting because we can't talk about this chapter yet. There is a new chapter icon on chapter 23. It appears to be a black square with what looks to be a shield that is lightly decorated on the inside, and then two spears that cross behind the shield, and each of the spears is half white and half black. It's a striking image. I think now that we know a little bit about the Aiel, we can probably figure out exactly what this is going to symbolize in the books. What are your thoughts here? Because I asked you about 5 minutes ago whether we were going to have an ill-advised discussion about this, and you went, I don't think we've done this before. Ooh, I want to talk about this one. I want to hear what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going to the places we always go, I think it stretches way beyond the frame more than many others, right? The tips and ends, with the other end of the spear,
Sure.
but go way out past the frame in both directions. But it's striking that everything about it feels so balanced.
Yeah.
This is one of the more symmetrical of these. I would say that in the rings of the shield at the center, I think the white and black kind of pattern on the outermost ring is looking to me like it's meant to kind of represent like a shiny appearance, right? Like they're not exactly evenly spaced colors or anything like that. So it's more like how the light might catch a reflective surface. And then we have six dots in the largest white band, kind of spaced roughly evenly. And then inside the innermost center of the circle, a seventh dot. So I'm curious about, the number seven has been present in other ways. I think part of the lesson of this first chapter that we're not talking about yet is just that everything that happens in the main world, there's a Aiel equivalent, right? It's not the same exactly, but there's kind of this parallel society that's been going on with, its own version of a lot of things. It's the Hydrox to the original continent's Oreos, in some way. No shade to Hydrox. I grew up on Hydrox.
Lots of shade to Hydrox.
It's the RC Cola to the Coca-Cola. Why'd I choose RC? So all of this makes just for an exciting image. And, I think part of my excitement is like I am starting to fall for the Aiel culture, right?
Mhm.
They were such a late tacked on addition to book 3 that here we are in book 4, and I'm glad to see they're getting their own chapter icon and things are expanding a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I really like the balance between light and dark in this icon. I think there's something really striking about the fact that both of the spear tips have that kind of like shadowed effect and that it results in the spearhead being half white and half black. I think that works really well. I actually read the outer design differently than you. You said it looked kind of like reflection to you. I was wondering whether it was kind of an intentionally uneven design. Like there's something to me about the Wheel of Time and things like stretching and compressing in weird ways that just felt on brand for me. But I could see it either way. The only other thing that I want to note about this is a I think strikingly dark image simply because the background is quite black and then it has a dark ring that I think emphasizes how dark everything but the center of the shield is. But at first glance, I see a lot more black in this black and white image than I would expect, given that I think we're correctly interpreting this is the Aiel symbol and we think of them as direct allies of Rand, at least at the moment.
Well, and again, to hint a little at the chapter, I think there's signs that they are not monolithic, right?
Yeah.
That we'd had hints before about tribes, and we get kind of more of an explanation of that here, although I'm sure not the full picture. And we also get the sense that there's some unrest between them. So that makes sense to me that if this is a fully realized society that mirrors the one we're familiar with just on the other side of the wall, then there would be good, there'd be bad.
Yeah.
You take the good, you take the bad, and there you have the facts of life, my friend. That's a reference to a television show from probably 30 years before you were born.
Yeah, I heard that theme song on Nick at Night sometimes. I think it is about time then that we dive into chapter 23, Beyond the Stone, and my probably 20-minute long summary of chapter 23, Beyond the Stone. Rand has effectively teleported them. Egwene does in fact see a city shrouded in mist and clouds, and Matt celebrates loudly. He is very excited that he hasn't had to go through yet another portal stone mishap. Rand is barely conscious. Moraine is chastising him, saying that the Angreal wasn't enough, but Rand says it worked, and Lan seems to approve of that. Moraine seems very upset by this and by Rand's choices, and chooses to remove some of his tiredness with the power, but Rand demands that she ask first in the future. Egwene is clearly upset at Rand and what she thinks of as his stubbornness, and notices that there are 2 Aiel camps nearby, as well as a third, much smaller camp. All of the Aiel, upon realizing that they are back in the waste, draw their weapons, and there's a very tense moment until someone says that the piece of Rhuidean still holds. 4 wise ones then approach, including Amos, who we previously met in the dream. And Amos, it's noted by Egwene, doesn't look old enough for the rest of her features. The Aiel then begin dividing up the spoils and split up by clan. And finally, once the wise ones arrive, everyone seems to settle down. And at this point, Egwene looks around and realizes that both Lan and Matt had already drawn their weapons, anticipating some sort of violence. The wise ones then begin to order Aviendha to stay rather than leaving with the rest of the Aiel, and Moraine warns Egwene about going to Aviendha or supporting her in any way. Rhuarc then greets Amos, who is of course one of his wives, and Egwene realizes what Moraine meant when she said that they would test the dreaming. It was that the wise ones apparently told her they would arrive on this day, and so Moraine was excited to see whether that was at all possible. Egwene seems excited to learn from the Aiel, and 2 Aiel specifically approach who are not wise ones. Rhuarc greets one of them warmly, while the other one seems kind of upset and standoffish with the rest. Amos told the Tardad Aiel to come, and so Rhuarc doesn't need to be worried about his own clan being there. And then Lan explains kind of some of the exchanges and reveals that he knows the Aiel significantly better than Moraine previously understood. Also, it's worth noting that Lan is somehow prepared for the desert heat. He starts passing out a bunch of like water bottles and ways to keep yourself cool, even though he did not anticipate being in the desert. At this point, we learn that the other Aiel who has approached is Couladin of the Shido, and he just seems to want to have everyone be mad at him. He seems to hate Rhuarc. He talks about his brother who is trying to become a a clan chief, and he also kind of seems to antagonize the wise ones, suggesting that he will go to Rhuidean regardless of what they say if his brother is not able to become a clan chief. At this point, Rand demands that he must be able to go to Rhuidean and that he can go because of his blood, being Aiel. Couladin is furious and refuses, but Rand says that his mother was Aiel and then is quickly corrected by Amos, who tells him it was actually his father who was an Aiel. At this point,
what? Sorry.
Jesus, you startled the hell out of me there. I am deep in my notes. At this
I just
point,
thought you could use a minute to catch a breath, so that's
Thank
why
you. I
I
appreciate
comedically
you.
reacted. Go ahead.
At this point, Matt says that he wants to go to Rhuidean. Couladin almost kills him, but is stopped by the wise ones, who we realize can channel. And Egwene then realizes why Amos's face looked so young. It is because she can channel, and she has something that Egwene refers to as something like the Aes Sedai face. At this point, Couladin is sent away. Matt is told that since he is not Aiel, he cannot go to Rhuidean, but Rand makes it pretty clear that he is going to be breaking some rules and changing some traditions, and the wise ones agree there is nothing they can do when so much will change, and so Matt is permitted to go. Both Matt and Rand are told that people who go to Rhuidean are dead for all intents and purposes until they return, and so they are not allowed to speak to the living. I find it very amusing that Matt immediately just starts talking to Rand as if none of the other people are there, and that is a wonderful reaction to that kind of pronouncement. At this point, Lan is also sent away, and Moraine then asks why the Aiel refer to him as Analine, and they say that they know of him as the last of the Malkieri, and then they say something really interesting. They say that the Dreamers were almost certain that Lan would be with them, which causes a reaction from both Egwene and Moraine because it suggests that it was not certain that Lan would be with them. Avienda is then called forward. She insists that she is a maiden of the spear, but is told that she has resisted being a wise one for too long, and Egwene realizes that Avienda can also channel. Avienda is first, Moraine kind of gives a look as if she wants to take Avienda to the tower, and she is told very directly from the wise ones, no, we can handle our own better than the White Tower can. And then, much to Egwene's dismay, she tells them that the White Tower coddles their novices. Avienda is then told to give up all of her spears and her weapons, and as you mentioned before, it's Robert Jordan, so also her clothing, and she is sent to Rhuidean to go through 3 rings, where she is told she will see visions of her future, and as it is described, she will not remember most of it, but she will know enough to know that some things must be and some things must not be. Egwene squeezes Avienda's hand as she leaves, and we have our 3rd departure for Rhuidean. At this point, Amos says that she fears the Shido will kill Rand or someone else in Rand's group, and they have a brief discussion about whether the Shido can be trusted. At this point, people in white robes come to take their horses, and they go to find shade in a tent. The Aes Sedai, which includes Egwene, according to her, are given water and are warmly welcomed. There are 4 wise ones who are named Amos, Melaine, Bear, and Sienna or Shauna. I never know how to pronounce that last name. And then there is Egwene asks about the servants that are serving them, and the wise ones seem extremely scandalized. They explain that there are no servants, that they are in fact Guy Shane, and then we get a deep discussion of Jia To, honor and duty, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, and I don't need to summarize in this already too long summary. Final paragraph of my notes. They tell a story that is only funny if you understand Jia To, and then Moraine asks about the letter and the uncertainty in it. The wise ones explain that they can see some of the future when they are in Teleron Riod, but not all of it, and that if there are things that are uncertain, they will only see possibilities of what could be and not the certainty of what will be. Moraine, in response to this, seems not to want... I'm sorry, I missed a very important thing. As they are explaining this to Moraine, one of the wise ones slips up and tells her that Moraine will die if she does not go through the rings in Rhuidean. Moraine responds to this not by actually saying anything relevant to that, but instead by giving us a lesson in a number of words in the Old Tongue. Most notably, at the end, she notes that Aiel means dedicated, and she wonders wonders what they are dedicated to, and that Gen Aiel means the only true dedicated, and this seems to make the wise ones extremely uncomfortable. At this point, Egwene tries to jump in and get some information, but is told to be quiet until the evening when they will discuss dreams. Moraine then says that she is going to go to Rhuidean as well. She asks permission. It is granted. She strips, of course, and makes her way towards Rhuidean as well. Egwene then suggests maybe she needs to go to Rhuidean because it seems like everyone else is, and told, no, that's absurd. The wise ones then tell Egwene that she will be treated as an apprentice while she is with them if she agrees. She does so, and then we get just a block of text that is probably just as boring as my lectures would be if you wrote them out, and Egwene is excited to learn about the world of dreams. Oh my God, was that a summary? Greg, just say words, any words.
My favorite moment in the chapter is a quote, and I don't often write down quotes, so I thought it was worth it when something stood out. It said, "Humankind is made for uncertainty, struggle, choice, and change." I am not in the market for a Wheel of Time tattoo, but that's not bad. That one, as quotes go, or if we have any high school seniors listening, because clearly we're popular with the young folk, that's a great yearbook quote, right? Like toss that in, everybody be like, wow, they are so deep. I wish I'd gotten to know that person. That would have really turned heads at my high school. As opposed to everybody who this ages me wrote, it's something unpredictable, but in the end it's right. I hope you had the time of your life. 18 people in my 100-person graduating class who picked that. So I, outside of that quote, I thought this was fantastic. I'm going to kind of admit I was much more interested in the what's up with our character and what's up with the Aiel.
Okay.
So I will, this might be one where, like our longer chapters, it's worth taking one strand at a time instead of necessarily the chapter in chronological order. But I would say the first thing that stood out to me is that the Aiel clans are in unrest, and that there is peace reigning seemingly only at the moment here, and it's on the edge of failing. And I immediately thought of Carrion and all these other societies we've had reference to, like the tumult, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that was immediately saying, like, yes. And in this time of uncertainty, all the rules are falling apart for everybody. And that's happening to the Aiel as well.
I would actually push back on that a little bit, because the story that we have gotten from the Aiel about the way that their culture works is, I agree with you, the Aiel are in a state of conflict. But I'm pretty sure, based on what Rhuarc told us like 4 or 5 chapters ago, the Aiel have been in a state of conflict since the breaking of the world, right? They are constantly in conflict with one another. We learned that like the Shido and the Tardad have been on and off in a blood feud for decades, maybe even centuries. So I think the difference between the Aiel and the rest of the world is the rest of the world has kind of had smooth sailing until this recent collapse, whereas the Aiel have kind of been used to this kind of conflict for most of their time.
And that then, thank you. And that links up with the portion about the Jaito and the Gaishan.
Gaishan is how I've said it, but I don't know if that's correct.
Well, and it is very funny because in our Dungeons and Dragons game last night, you used the word gi, which is a karate term, and your wife repeated it, and I was like, well, what is happening? Like, I don't understand this word. So then when I got to the guy Shane, I was like, oh, is this gi again? Like, did I get confused? And now, and just gi is a very well-known piece of martial arts wardrobe that I just had no access to because I've never taken martial arts or anything. But it was very funny last night. And then the fact that it was like a callback here made me giggle a lot. But the idea of the guy Shane and the Jaito, I think are really interesting. And I think this fits a pattern where we've seen a lot of characters who work with honor, even in kind of barbaric or different systems. Now, who knows when we're recording this, but when you're listening, I think we're in the middle of Dune season, if you're listening to it as it comes out. And so I will say, with a totally different sci-fi epic on my mind, this chapter just, and the Aiel screamed Dune to me, and I'm sure the relationship is there, knowing how Robert Jordan, read voraciously again, that these felt very much like the Fremen, and the Dune films. I will, of course, not spoil them, but the Dune films and the books make it clear, the Fremen are not a monolithic society either,
Yeah.
and the whole desert setting just pulls all that out. And I think if I assume there is a direct relationship, but if not, it's like they're both working on the idea of the Bedouin cultures that
Yeah.
populated the Middle East, and that is working here. And the fact that the heat and the sand are or particularly the heat is so oppressive in this chapter. It's like, yeah, this is that culture, and be clear on that.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that Robert Jordan pulls off so effectively is he takes so many hints from one or two cultures that you're like, I know that is kind of where this is grounded in. And then the little details all feel like they are drawing from completely different places all around the world, right? Giotto feels immensely, probably the best real world corollary I can come up with is like the samurai code, right? It's very Eastern in the way that it approaches its, thoughts about like violence and how it can or should be avoided. I love Giotto. I think it is just a fascinating philosophy. The idea of an entire culture taking honor that seriously, I feel like is something that Robert Jordan really wanted to think about. Like, what would that mean? We think about honor a lot in Western stories, but it's often like the betrayal of honor, as opposed to, I think Robert Jordan kind of just wants to say, what if everyone actually just was honorable in a society? And then he takes that and he systematizes it in a way that just it feels accurate of any system of manners that I have ever tried to learn other than my own, right? Like, I grew up in the Midwest. I know what polite is here. And if anyone anywhere else tells me something I think is polite isn't, it just baffles me. And that feels like Egwene's reaction to Giotto, and that's correct as far as I'm concerned.
Well, bless your heart, you little Midwesterner. Which I understand is Midwestern for kind of a vile dismissal of you. Well, and I just want to acknowledge what you said and say I would also put the kind of phonemes that make up Jaito, that those sound Eastern, and like I don't know my characters of Chinese or Japanese, but I would believe that those were the sounds of those characters. So that's there. And I also really liked it. I thought that kind of explanation coupled it comes after, but back to when Avienda is being kind of essentially told like now is the time, throw away your dolls and concerns. And Egwene's reaction as they have her throw her sword and her bow away is like, why would you have her treat these things like garbage? And that is a reaction given to Egwene because it's clear Avienda just has to be told now is the time and you're bound to this, and she does it. So whatever hesitation existed, this is the trump card for it.
Yeah, and I think that was what was so interesting about Avienda is we didn't know what she was running from. And so it felt like Avienda was kind of resisting her destiny. And now it's really fascinating because we find out that her destiny isn't in any way bad, right? I think last week was when we had the reader question who was talking about Avienda kind of being a reluctant hero and how that's happened over and over again. Well, there's a part of me that thinks this is very different because Rand is a reluctant hero because the prophecies say he's going to die, and Matt is a reluctant hero because adventures don't involve just hanging out at bars and gambling, and Perrin is a reluctant hero because he doesn't want the wolf to take him over, and Avienda is a reluctant hero because she doesn't want a promotion. It feels a little bit different, even though I think that the kind of trajectory of the plot is the same. And so that I think is the thing that makes me kind of intrigued by Avienda in this chapter is I still want to figure out what is it about being a wise one that she was resisting so hard.
Yes, I was thinking of like the analogy. It's like, getting your Hogwarts letter and running away yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like it's slightly different because you're right. It is meant to be an honor or a promotion, although it doesn't seem, at least thus far, like an awesome life, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like Aes Sedai have a hard training, but it seems like once they're at the upper levels, it's pretty comfy in that tower, up in your ivory tower, man. But woman, sorry. I do think that could be a part of that and just, it feels, especially here, the wise ones feel very monastic. Like it's
Yeah.
going to be a plain, simple life. And yes, you're going to have the power and the ability and all the gifts, but you're not going to like get to go to the taverns
Yeah.
or things like that.
Yeah, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually just want to bring one thing really quickly back while we're still on kind of the topic of Aiel culture and Giotto. I just wanted to give Robert Jordan some credit. Giotto introduced. We get like 4 or 5 different examples of like how do Gaishain work? How can you gain honor? How can you, lose honor? And then Robert Jordan has one of the characters tell a joke about 2 people who had an interesting interaction where like a woman asked to be made Gaishain and then her family got in a blood feud with the other family and then someone got married and they had their mom as their Gaishain or something, and that felt like the perfect example of something that I really love in fantasy genre literature in particular, but I suppose it can happen in any literature where you kind of slowly piece together little bits of kind of like culture or language or something like that. And then by the end of the book or a certain point in the book, you can hear something that you would not have understood even a little bit at the beginning, but now you fully comprehend it. And I don't know if a first time reader would be quite there on that joke yet, but it's a trick that I feel like is really hard to pull off. And I'm trying to think of examples of when it's worked well in the past. And like Watership Down is the best example I can come up with, right? Like at the end of that book, a rabbit tells a joke in a language that only exists in that book, and you get it if you followed the book well. And we're not quite there with the Aiel yet, but like that's the kind of game I feel Robert Jordan playing a little bit here. He's building a world and then trying to prove to you you know it well enough that you can laugh at something that would make zero sense were it not for the context.
Yeah, I have actually not ever read Watership Down or seen the I hear traumatizing animated film that is based on it. But I do think about like a really good stand-up routine where they build callbacks to that level where you get to the end and they say something. I mean, the famous example of this is Mike Birbiglia's Thank God for Jokes, where he across the whole special throws in kind of problematic statements and then at the end says, and if you repeat this to your friends you could say, and then lists all the absolutely horrifically bad things he said and how that could be taken wrong. And
Yeah.
it's like you feel this sense of fulfillment because you've been on the journey and you're in on the joke, and I see that's kind of the emotion you're tapping into. um, I can't speak too much to that, but I will just say I got a chuckle when I realized they kept calling them wetlanders,
Yeah.
which I really liked. A lot of the slurs in our culture, which are not being endorsed here, are the other direction, right? We
Right.
say bad, or people, not you and I, but people say bad things about different cultures and from the desert and so on. And then here it's like, well, you weird wetlanders. It's like
Yeah.
and just the name Wetlanders sounds just gross. So it
Yeah.
just totally worked for me. And I found myself laughing at that a lot.
Yeah, I really love this Aiel section. I think we just get so many tiny little details that kind of make the world work, and it's really effective. I think if we have kind of talked about the broad Aiel culture section, maybe it makes sense from here to kind of divide this by character because we kind of just get like the rotating door of characters in and out quite a bit throughout this chapter. The first one of the first to arrive on screen and also one of the first to leave is Lan. And he gets a couple of really interesting spotlight moments early on in this chapter, right? He apparently has a nickname among the Aiel on a line. He seems to support Rand multiple times in this chapter. And we also learn that he might not have made the trip had things come out differently. Did you kind of clock? I felt like Lan was getting a lot more of the spotlight in this chapter than I expected. Was that your kind of take on it as well?
Yeah, in our commentary on the television show, I have returned to the idea that Lan got a promotion for the TV show. Like
Mhm.
he's often just Lan's also here, or Lan is in this city, but he's off taking care of details while the interesting conversations happen.
Mhm.
So really liked how much he got here. I liked that moment, in my head it played out where like he said something and they all turned like agog at him, and he's like, "What? I've been here. Like,
Yeah.
I had a life before all of you weirdos, so it's not a problem." So I like that moment a lot, but I would say my favorite part was the name, how he is the man who is alone, but also the man who is his own nation,
Yeah.
essentially, right? And I thought that was really cool, and I'm getting more intrigued by the old tongue, and I think this chapter, like, you have to be, because they give
Yeah.
such rich detail. But that felt the cliche one from my grad school days is how utopia means like the best place, but also no place. And like we just have these things, like that's how language works. And
Yeah.
so it's like, oh, this is good world building because it's a familiar kind of sure totally works. And then they do that like 5 more times this chapter for that.
Yeah.
Um just to keep you only saying, yeah, I will then say, reacting to the final thing you brought up, I took that to mean that he really could have gone with Nynaeve, right?
Mm.
We have a moment next chapter, spoiler if you're listening to only the chapter at a time, where a coin is flipped and it lands on its edge. And it felt to me that was Lan here. Like they're
Yeah.
telling us, yeah, Lan flipped a coin and he really could have gone either way here and happened to tip this direction instead of the other direction.
Yeah, I really liked that in combination with the moment at the very beginning of the chapter where Moraine is chastising Rand for kind of like taking the risk and being right at the edge of what he could possibly have handled. And Rand's response to that is, well, it worked. And Lan immediately kind of echoes that. And that kind of idea that Lan is moving away from Moraine. He's surprising her. He's giving answers that are the opposite of what she's doing. He seems to be drawing a lot of connections to the Two Rivers folk, probably because of Nynaeve, but not entirely because of Nynaeve. And all of that, I feel like, is in tension, exactly as you're describing, with everything about Lan and Moraine in this chapter, right? The fact that he could have not come, I think, is crazy. I don't have any good analysis for that. That's just wild given who that character is. I doubt we have much else to say about Lan. So Rand and Mat are the next ones to make their way out of the tent. And we learn some juicy details about Rand, and then none of it gets expounded on at all in this chapter. Was there anything that you saw from either of the boys that either surprised you or excited you?
Well, the big one seems to be running contra to the television show in my mind. And so I'm gonna lightly spoil season 1 if you have not watched the television show. By appearances, at the end of the first season of the television show, we see Rand being born of an Aiel mother, and so I was very surprised here to hear the wise ones say directly, "No, it's not your mother's blood; it's your father's blood." So I'm immediately wondering, well, what's going on here? Now, I'm sure you're not going to comment.
I shouldn't.
Pausing for you to say no comment. And so that was very surprising to me, and makes me, think about how I'm consuming this differently than like your original fans, and like
Yeah.
this weird kind of moment where I am kind of jumping between planes of the Wheel of Time experience. But I will just say I really like that the structure of the chapter got it so Egwene could ask follow-up questions that the
Yeah.
audience would be mad if nobody asked, but also there was a perfectly good reason not to answer them, right? That's
Yeah.
his story and he gets to tell that. I guess yeah. Reactions, if you can say anything about Rand, what were you thinking?
I guess all that I can say is that there is no contradiction. I can't be any more specific than that, but the two things do square. Continue.
So for Mat, I would say the big surprise here is just how immediate he decided to follow Rand. I'm having, and probably we'll save this mostly for next chapter, I'm having a little trouble figuring out Mat's motivations. And then within those motivations, figuring out who's in control of Mat, who's driving the Mat, right? So, yeah.
I think this is the straightforward version of Mat. I think the right question is who's driving, and I think the right answer is it doesn't matter. He's just doing what the snakes told him to do, right? And so I think playing that game is really fun, although we're going to need to talk about that game at some point in the near future of who's driving. But I feel like to some degree, this is Mat who was told what to do, and Matt's a simple boy and he does what he's told what to do. Maybe I'm wrong
Uh,
about that, but that's my thinking.
no, but that's really all I have to say about him. I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll talk a lot more next chapter, but okay, he just decides immediately and he goes. So great.
Excellent. We have already talked about Avienda, unless you had anything else to add specifically about her, which I think leaves us with Moraine, who has a really interesting arc in this chapter in that she starts it kind of surprised that they have arrived and then slowly becomes more and more confident. It's clear she kind of knows more than, she's letting on. There are things that she's anticipating and knows, and then everything gets kind of thrown off its axis when I forget which of the wise ones it was who let slip. But one of them basically implies they know that she will die if she does not go through the rings in Rhuidean, and the entire conversation changes immediately when that happens. And I thought Moraine not responding to that information, but instead giving a list of definitions of words in the old tongue felt like the perfect example of how Aes Sedai kind of mask their emotions and responses to things. So that was kind of the case study I would love to hear your analysis of, but I don't know exactly what take there is to have on that. I just thought it was a really interesting moment.
Yeah, I think I would agree, but have worded it slightly differently. That this is a way to see how Moraine's mind works, right? That she is somebody who responds intellectually to problems, and she's going to gather the problem. And even when she's seemingly a bit out of control and could be emotional in response, she's going to try to figure out the clues she has and build that. So I thought that also just works for how Moraine has seemed across this whole book so far. Like we've mentioned in previous weeks, that she seems to be moving away from I am in control of this situation to I'm playing catch up in a lot of ways. And that opening moment with Lan and Rand and her also fits that mold, right? And so, we've said it before, she seems like she's on her back foot a lot and reacting. And if that's where you're at, then yeah, strip naked and head into the desert. Let's do this.
That's usually my go-to whenever I make a life decision. It's just, okay, I know what I'm doing, naked in the desert. It's time. I think broadly speaking, we have covered all of the bases, right? Moraine, I think, has interesting plot things going on here, but as you mentioned, we're never in her head, so it's a little bit hard to do too much deep diving. I guess the only thing we haven't really talked about is Egwene. And the only real surprise I had here is just how enthusiastic she is in the face of just everyone telling her, like, no, be quiet, go away. Right? Like she is the afterthought in this chapter if it weren't for the fact that we were in her head. And yet we come out of it with her like, yes, I get to learn. And I wish I had students who had that reaction to anything ever.
Yeah, big Hermione energy from Egwene this chapter. But yeah, I have down that she is just reacting to everything. That's her job this chapter. And I wrote down at the end, which is my view, but not her view. I said Egwene gets a raw deal, right? She's busted kind of back down a level to student again. And while her view is excited to learn and expand her knowledge, I'm like, this is not cool for Egwene, but it is a common fantasy trope. I was actually just thinking of the Patrick Rothfuss, right? Like, let's build up a character through education and so on. So, God, he needs to get that third book written, please, sometime soon. So I do think, this is a familiar pattern, and I'm excited to see where it goes in this particular case.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I know where it goes, and we're getting there. I'm so excited. Chapter 24, Rhuidean. Mat is hot. He is dried out. The sun has burnt him all over. He wonders how the fog remains around Rhuidean, although he quickly realizes that it must be the power. And then he keeps repeating to himself every time that he thinks of something that is created by the power, he wishes he had the ability to be free of Aes Sedai. Mat and Rand then begin debating whether or not they saw Avienda run by naked. Mat Mat starts to worry that if they're out there too long, it is going to get dark and they may need to deal with lions. And then Rand checks in with Mat to make sure he is sure. Mat kind of responds responds and says, I'm not entirely sure. I'll bet those snakes only tell you, they just tell everyone to go to Rhuidean, to which Rand is quiet for a moment and then responds that the snakes did not mention Rhuidean to him at all, and he is not here as a result of their advice. So Matt knows he actually needs to go into Rhuidean. Both of them walk into the mist. There is no sound, but suddenly they get through and they are in a dimly lit city. As you mentioned, it appears to be primarily like unfinished skyscrapers and palaces, large, daunting buildings. Matt sees an empty water fountain and seems to be very upset about the fact that there is no water. And then Rand channels, brings up water. Both of them get wet. They drink. They're extremely excited about it. And then Matt realizes that Rand channeled and worries about Rand's sanity. There's a moment where Rand kind of spaces out, and this causes Matt to be even more worried. But eventually they realize they just need to get to the heart of the city. They arrive at a large plaza that has a giant tree near rings of glass columns. Oh, we know what the podcast is called. Isn't it wonderful? There are hundreds of terangrial littering the plaza. Rand pauses to study two of them that appear to be figurines of a man and a woman holding crystal globes. He kneels to pick them up, but then decides not to. Eventually, the two realize that the tree they are walking under is Avendasora, the tree of life, and they feel a feeling of peace and say that it is actually understandable that Gautama meditated under the tree for 40 years. They talk about the truth of that legend, and then Rand says that he must go on alone. This is the moment where Matt decides to flip the coin to decide what to do, and it lands on its side. It then falls over and tells Matt not to go, to which Matt wonders whether or not Rand channeled it over, although he can't be sure. Rand then walks through the glass columns, and he disappears. Matt elects to wait, tells himself that he is going to wait for approximately an hour, and then he sees the curved stone doorway, very similar, but not exactly identical to the one that he saw in the heart of the Stone of Tyr. He goes through the door. Initially, it is empty and he is upset, but then a fox-ish man greets him, saying that it has been a long time, and asks if he keeps the old treaties. All of the things are the same as what happened with the snakes, except there is a new addition to the treaties, that they are banned from devices that make light. The person seems eager for Matt to continue onward, and when Matt suggests that he might not go on, the guide kind of drags him onward and tries to keep him moving. It becomes apparent that the guide is wearing straps that are made of human leather, and as they walk on and on, it takes over an hour, and Matt is kind of baffled at how it is taking so long and clearly gets irritated with his guide. Eventually, he arrives to a room with a number of pillars. At first, they are empty, but then when he looks away and looks back, there are then many foxes at the top of those pillars, and they then demand what he wants. Matt then starts asking them a series of questions, trying to clarify the things that the snakes told him, and none of those questions receive responses. Eventually, he gets frustrated and says if he had his way, he would want those holes in his memories filled, and when he says that, the response is done. Matt doesn't understand, asks a series of questions, again receives no response, and then states that he wants a way to be free of the power and that he wants a way back to Rhuidean and away from them. The foxes then say done and done, and then say that he was smart to ask for a way out, but since he set no price, they will set the price. Matt's world then goes dark, and he struggles to breathe. That feels like the kind of chapter where a lot of things happen, and I have nothing I can say about it because all of it is foreshadowing something that comes later. What do you have to say about this chapter, which is much shorter, but honestly, I think is just as dense and has just as many interesting things going on in it compared to the previous one?
Yeah, both chapters are definitely a big step up in the mythology and an expansion of the things we need to learn and the things we need to consider. So what came to mind first as they entered this, I do want to give credit to the kind of visuals of a clouded and or a fog dome and then a city that exists within it. That works really well for me. I thought this is another reference to the TV show, but not to anything spoilery. Just to the very first episode, they kind of show a city in ruins, like skyscrapers with plants built over them. Spoilers for the first, I think, literal minute of the television show. And so to me, I was like, oh, we're finally getting to some explanation of that. Not literally that image that is a different place, but we're starting to piece together this how this world has a relationship with our own, which we've talked about a few times, and so on. So that was really exciting. And then I was spending a lot of this essentially playing the game of, is this a city on its way up or a city on its way down? Because moments felt like Walking Dead or some kind of or I Am Legend, like a single pair of people in a deserted city, dangers and monsters that are lurking, but we didn't see any of in this chapter, obviously. Or is this more like the world to come, right? They call it Cloud City a few times in my Star Wars head when like beep boop, I know that place. But city in the clouds, which we know is because it's in the fog, feels more heavenly or more, beautiful than it does ominous. So that was a game I was playing for a lot of this, is trying to figure out essentially how nervous should I be in this space.
Well, and to some degree, I think this comes down to the way that Robert Jordan describes situations like this. I've talked about this before. I think if you were to say fantasy is the main genre of the Wheel of Time, what is its like secondary genre? I think the answer, at least in the early books, is horror. There's a lot of kind of really dark moments, and walking through this city, I think you're exactly right to evoke like a zombie movie. The descriptions are beautiful. Nothing about it makes me think like this place is bad, but everything just feels ominous. And I think it's just that feeling of emptiness that gets captured really exceptionally well here.
Well, and there's references to lights and images. I think, again, it's naked people, they say. And that to me just felt like, you're walking through an abandoned Times Square, right? Yeah. What would that look like, after people? And, I don't think there's literally nude people on billboards in Times Square anymore. Heyo, but that's just a New York slam that they've Disneyfied Times Square. But I do now that like there's something that there was a society here at some point, or an anticipated one, and then it didn't happen. And you're right, the feeling of that is ominous.
Well, and I think that some of that also plays into with the fact that Matt spends the first half of the chapter trying to figure out how sane Rand is, right? In particular, when Rand channels to bring the water up, that clearly unsettles Matt in a really deep way. And so I think that kind of state of mind of Matt probably is playing into the way that this description seems just so off-putting to one degree or another.
Yes, and I am again asking who's driving Matt, because we know the old version of Matt, meaning the version of him that's coming out with the luck and all that, really disliked the Aes Sedai and the power, and that seems to be a primary kind of emotion here. But I would also couple that ominous feeling then with this game we continue to play with Rand, which is he mad? Is he going mad? And the moment in your summary that you discussed of the fountain really felt like a moment we had to question that, or we're supposed to question that. Now, I will say they've actually asked the question too many times for me. So now my mind is clearly in, no, Rand is completely rational and is not going mad. That's going to be the twist, instead of he's actually going mad and we're just not noticing. That's where I'm at in this chapter. Clock it, episode 98 of the podcast.
I like that prediction. We will see whether or not it comes true sometime in the next 9, 10, maybe 11 books. We'll see how that goes. The one thing in here... Oh, no, we already said the one thing that I wanted to talk about in here. Let's move on then to Avendesora, the Tree of Life, right? We get this plaza that is full of ter'angreal and the glass columns and the tree. And the moment that really drove that home is yet another reference to our world, which is the fact that when we get what was kind of the main legend of Avendesora, it is the fact that Gautam apparently meditated under the tree for 40 years. Well, Gautama Buddha is a person who meditated under a tree for an extensive period of time and founded a modern religion. This feels like another example where a story from our time maybe has been altered or misremembered, but still survives into the modern day, if you will, of Rand and Matt. That was the only little detail there that I really latched onto. Was there anything in this section that really, especially with the Terangriel, you were interested in?
I want to somebody post the Captain America. I understood that reference because I also caught the Buddha reference there, and I think of how popular those images are. Like you
Yeah.
can imagine if this is our society 3,000 years later, that is something that would survive, or the story of that. And I mean, a tree of life is very central to Christian mythology, Buddhist mythology, and Norse mythology, right?
Yeah.
This kind of central, I never know how to pronounce the Norse one. It's like Yggdrasil or something. It's
Yggdrasil.
very, yeah, it's got like three Y's in it in places that surprise you. Now I'm thinking of Madison from She-Hulk, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that stood out to me, and it's
Yep.
at the center here, which makes it feel, we've already seen the eye of the world, but this feels very wellspring, like center of all that is good and great.
Yeah.
And then of course Garden of Eden, which it would be a sin to eat from the tree, right? That
Mhm.
the tree is placed there to tempt us, but we're supposed to ignore it. All of that is kind of invoked, I think, here, and no
Yeah.
single one is pinned down, I would imagine, quite purposefully. Um, the other Captain America, I understood that reference is because I also noted in my notes the one I felt like every description of the Terangrial, this felt like somebody's great collection that they just
Yeah.
like abandoned here. And I assumed that many of those would have greater significance in a reread, like once we see where this all goes. But I also clocked the statues because we've
Yeah.
now talked about these statues a lot. We have the one outside Carrion being unearthed,
Yeah.
and a reference to one on the other. Is it in Arthur Hawkwing's continent, or is it just on the other
No,
side of the?
it
Is
is.
over by like Toman's Head.
It's actually down southwest as opposed to Toman's Head, which is like northwest. But yes.
Yeah. So that stood out to me. And I thought in particular the way in according to Matt's narration, Rand stopped to touch them and
Mhm.
inspect them and then immediately like stood upright
Yeah.
fast. And that to me felt like a metaphor for like we should not be messing with these things, right? Like it's
Mhm.
symbolic of the larger plot line. So curious to see where that goes, but that's actually the only one I really clocked as something that I could recognize.
Yeah, and I think you got the two. Good on you. Everything else in there, I'm like, oh, that's kind of fun. I don't really have anything to say
Hmm.
about them. So then Matt walks through a doorway, and it's foxes instead of snakes. And I really want to avoid setting any expectations here because we haven't gotten any follow up on this, right? We only know the conversation, not what happened as a result of it. So I kind of want you to steer Matt on the other side of the twisted stone doorway. What stood out to you? What similarities or differences from the last scene were you kind of interested in? I just kind of want your take on the second half of this chapter.
It was unexpected. I mean, well, when he sees the door, it looks just enough like it. He did mention that it had markings around the edges that were not this, or well, he says like, well, no, I don't remember seeing those on the other, but kind of questioned whether they might be there or not.
I'm pretty sure on the one there are triangles facing upward, and on the other there are triangles facing downward. So it's similar enough that you could absolutely look at it and think it's the same door, but the descriptions are different.
And it kind of fits the animals, right?
Yeah.
Like a fox head is a downward pointing triangle in some ways, and a snake head is a upward pointing triangle in some kind of abstract
Totally.
symbology. Um, so how I read what happened is once the Foxman kind of guarantees that the contract is followed, he says long time, which I assumed meant he was talking to the old blood Rand, not young Rand.
Matt.
And then Matt, sorry, whoops,
Yep.
Matt. And then when he confirms that it's all set, it's like, and Matt says this in his narration, the Foxman reads him, like reads his memories and thoughts, figures out his motivation. and then essentially is like, oh, you don't actually want to go see those doors again. You want to go do this other thing. And my takeaway from the chapter as a whole, it's like, oh, you're not actually looking for truth. You're looking to have wishes granted. And this other tribunal has all appearances of wishes being granted, right? Like it's a council listening that wants to hear what you want and then will take care of things. And yet Matt approaches this as the other thing.
Right.
So he asks questions and they can't answer them and say nothing. And then in his frustration, and in my notes, I just have a pure Gandalf quote because he's in this chapter of fool of a took, right? Which is like, you idiot, like you are. And so the other pop culture reference was the Dungeons and Dragons movie is way better than people give it credit for, and they should have announced 5 sequels by now. If anything is screaming for a cinematic universe, it's that. Have 5 different parties, bring them all together in a movie. It would be fantastic. Anyway,
you're not wrong.
So when there's the scene where they're doing the interrogate the dead, and they would ask questions that were a joke, and then the guy would die too fast. So it felt to me like in his exasperation, he's then making these really, really dangerous requests.
Yeah.
And I never want to see the Aes Sedai again. I want to be far away from all these things. Like, these are the things on his mind. And they're just like, check, got it. You got it. You got it. And then the most ominous moment in the chapter is, well, you didn't set a price. So it sounds to me like the way that room is supposed to work is, if you make it so Aes Sedai never threaten me again, I will kill 500 people or whatever. Like I'll sacrifice 3 fatted calves for you. And since he doesn't set a price, it sounds like they'll just make the things happen and come calling later for the price. And that's pretty ominous. And then fade to black with me going in my notes, rut-row, because I don't think we're heading good places.
I just need to know that Matt thus far, assuming that your interpretation is correct, which I am not denying, which should tell you all you need to know, Matt thus far has been told he can get 3 questions answered truthfully no matter what the question is, and then inadvertently got granted 3 wishes, which means that he had 6 super powerful magical things, and he used one of them the way he wanted to, and then got mad and wasted the other 5. And if that's not Matt, I don't know what is.
Very nice. Well, and so then I'll just say that makes me really excited to see where that plot line goes, and nervous and scared. I did happen to read the first line of the next chapter, so I know we're headed into Rand territory next week. And then based on the title of the one after that, I would imagine we're not headed back to Matt for a while. So I suspect we might be in a holding pattern. It also, the only other thing I'll say is, again, in the television show world, people who didn't watch or listen to our episodes, the actor who played Matt in season 1 was unceremoniously removed because he quit the show in pandemic times. And so I was like, oh, they just did it early. They're just getting Matt off the board a little early. So we'll see if he's the same person when he comes back. Although, again, as I said in those recap episodes that haven't aired yet, I never would have known that was a different actor.
Yeah.
As you clued me in. So assuming you don't have much else to say, not if that's correct, then I will say that next week we have 2 chapters again. Chapter 25, The Road to the Spear, and Chapter 26, The Dedicated. And we didn't talk about it, but I assume Tyler would like me to warn you that it's actually a pretty serious chunk of pages. This is going to be a long one in this week.
That is correct. This is a big boy. It is worth noting this previous week, the one that we just finished discussing, was also something of a big boy, specifically so that chapters 25 and 26 could be together in the same week. If you are someone who normally reads 1 chapter at a time, for the love of God, don't do that next week. We're going to want to talk about the whole thing all at once. The other thing that I just want to mention to you, Greg, in particular, because I know that you often read with your children, do not this week. This is a week where you focus on the book. Please give it your time and attention. It's a good one, y'all.
See you next time through the glass columns.
Literally.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend the show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.